In verse 7 of today's passage it says, "I say this because many deceivers, who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh, have gone out into the world." Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. The prophecy of the Antichrist is also found in the Old Testament Daniel 11. Daniel sees great visions about the Great War. This war covers the period from the Civil War in the Old Testament to the Civil War that will take place at the end of the world. In particular, in Daniel 11, the war between Ptolemy of Egypt, the king of the south, and Antiochus Epiphanes of Syria, the king of the north, suddenly changes direction. This reveals that this revelation is a war related to an apocalyptic event. This means that the period of 69 weeks, and the remaining 1 week in the 70 weeks mentioned in Daniel 9, should be interpreted as the future period from the first coming of Jesus to his second coming. And Daniel 11 mentions the little horn, which foretells the appearance of Antiochus Epiphanes, the model of the Antichrist. This becomes even more clear when we look at the religious atrocities and persecutions he committed against Israel. And in Daniel 11, the Persian kingdom will appear on the stage of history by the providence of God. But its power will not last long. Also, the fourth king of Persia rises, and in Daniel 1:1-3 it says, "Now then, I tell you the truth, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and then a fourth, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will arise, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases." Here, the 3 kings from Bactria refer to the kings who will appear after Cyrus, namely Cambyses, Smerdis, and Darius Hystaspes. These are people from 529 BC and later. And there is a special explanation for the 4th king to appear. "And the 4th kingdom shall be strong above all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces, and mix it up." Verse 19. The 4th one after him will be far richer and more powerful than the others, and will subjugate all peoples and strike the Greek kingdom. This king is Xerxes, the 4th ruler of the Persian Empire, which was established after King Darius. This king is referred to as Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. King Xerxes inherited a prosperous country from his father, King Darius. With his wealth, he increased the country's power and military strength to fulfill his dream of conquering Greece, which had been his father's long-cherished ambition. However, as his plan to conquer Greece dragged on, the treasury of Persia ran dry and the country began to decline. After suffering a decisive defeat at the Battle of Salamis against Alexander the Great of Greece, the power of the Persian Empire gradually weakened and it eventually collapsed. As Daniel had foretold, a powerful king would rise in the future and conquer the world with great authority. That king was Alexander the Great of Greece. In 334 BC, he conquered the Persian Empire and also conquered Egypt and built the city of Alexandria, which was named after him, on the banks of the Nile. Alexander conquered the border of India and died at the age of 32 in 323 BC after suffering from malaria, a fever, while preparing for an expedition to Arabia. After that, Alexander's son and his half-brother were assassinated, and his country was divided among 4 of his generals. Daniel prophesied this in Daniel 11:4, after he has arisen, his empire will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others. Daniel's prophecy was fulfilled. Here, it is said that Alexander's kingdom would be divided into 4 parts. And the Hellenistic Empire would be divided into 4 parts: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy after Alexander's death. Cassander ruled Macedonia, Lysimachus ruled Thrace, Seleucus ruled Syria, and Ptolemy ruled Egypt. These 7 nations did not stop fighting until they were annexed by Rome. And the battle between Egypt and Syria was the most intense. Daniel 11 deals with the war between these 2 nations among the 4 nations. Then Antiochus Epiphanes, the little horn, appears. And this eventually adds a revelation that changes the aspect of the end time war to that of a symbol of the end time war. Through the appearance of Antiochus Epiphanes of Syria, the Jews were shown the reality of the Antichrist who would appear at the end of time. 1. First, it was said that when the Antichrist appears, he will insult and defile the Holy Temple. Antiochus Epiphanes of Syria, the king of the north, enters Jerusalem on his expedition to conquer Egypt in the south, and he insults and defiles the Holy Temple. In the past, Antiochus Epiphanes, when things did not go well on his expedition, entered the Jerusalem castle, which was already under the influence of Syria, on his way back to his home country, and took his anger out on the Jews. He made it impossible for the Jews to offer their daily worship, prayers, and offerings to God. He then erected an idol of Zeus, an abomination that destroys the temple, and slaughtered pigs on the altar. In other words, this foreshadowed that something similar would happen in the Jerusalem temple by the Antichrist at the end of the world. Jesus confirms this. Matthew chapter 24:15. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand Daniel 12:11 from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished. And the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. However, Jesus quoted this passage to say that what had already happened in the past would happen again when Jesus returned. What does this mean? It means that the history of the Jews repeats itself. The same thing that was done by Antiochus Epiphanes in the past will happen again in the end times, when a little horn Antichrist like Epiphanes will rise in Jerusalem and do something similar. So, the little horn Antichrist will rise at the end of time and commit the same apostate acts that Antiochus Epiphanes of Syria committed in the temple. What are these apostate acts? It says in Daniel 12:11, he will speak against the Most High and try to make trouble for the holy ones of the Most High. He will also try to change times and laws. The holy ones will be given into his hands, and will be held for a time, 2 times, and half a time. Also, in Daniel 11:32, it says, with flattery. He will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but Antiochus Epiphanes was a man of great cunning, so when he entered Jerusalem, he would appoint the most cunning and greedy of the religious leaders to important positions, in order to betray the law for the sake of honor or power. And Zechariah 1:3-8-9 says, in the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 will be struck down and perish. Yet 1/3 will be left in it. 9 This third I will put into the fire, I will refine them like silver and test them like gold. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God. In the end, Israel will be occupied by the Antichrist, and the Jews will suffer religious persecution and tribulations. In the midst of this, the Jews who have been refined and tested will become the remnant and accept Christ, receive final salvation, and receive the blessings of the Messianic kingdom. It can be seen that the little horn in Daniel 7 is the figure of the Antichrist, who will appear in the end times, and the little horn in Daniel 8 refers to Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes up to verse 35 of Daniel 11 is the little horn that existed in history, and the figure of Antiochus Epiphanes from verse 36 of Daniel 11 is the little horn as the Antichrist who will appear at the end of humanity. In other words, verse 35 speaks of Antiochus Epiphanes as a typical figure of the Antichrist, who will appear at the end, and verse 36 speaks of the Antichrist, who will actually appear at the end. Secondly, it is said that in the end times, the king of the south and the king of the north, prophesied by Daniel, will compete for power and cause war. Therefore, the civil war in Daniel 11:40 refers to a new type of civil war that will occur at the end of time. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry, and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. This is not the scene of the civil war between Egypt and Syria, which took place in the past. The time of the end, in which this war takes place, refers to the end times mentioned in Daniel 121. This war should be seen as the Euphrates War, an apocalyptic war that takes place in the Middle East. The starting point of this civil war that will take place at the end of time will be the attack by the king of the south on the Antichrist stationed in Jerusalem. The king of the south refers to the former Ptolemy, the king of Egypt. But in the end times, it can be seen as the Islamic forces of the Arab world in the Middle East, which symbolizes Egypt. The war is likely to break out when the Islamic forces in the Middle East, symbolized by the king of the south, attack the Antichrist, the king of the north. Here, the king of the north is the Antiochus Epiphanes of Syria, who symbolizes the Antichrist, whose forces will invade Israel like a flood at the end of time, bringing new tribulation to Jerusalem. The prophecy about this person is found in Ezekiel chapters 3814-16. It refers to this person as Gog and Magog, who are located in the far north. This war will escalate as they invade Jerusalem, and eventually escalate into a world war. Interpreting this war is complex and difficult. However, we must view this war as an end-time war, and if this North-South war is an end-time war revelation 913-18, we cannot help but connect it to the Euphrates War. This Euphrates War is a global nuclear war that occurs due to the collision of 4 winds. It would not be wrong to call this war the Third World War because 1/3 of the world's population will die in this war. It would be impossible for this many people to die without a nuclear war. And this war in the last days begins with a battle between the king of the south, the Islamic world, and the king of the north, he. Daniel 11:40 says, at the time of the end the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. And the one referred to here as he is the Antichrist, who is already being worshipped as a god by the people of the world. This end-time war, the Euphrates War, is likely to take place during the fulfillment of the last 7 years of Daniel. The Antichrist is a reference to the Antichrist who is already hailed as the Messiah by the Jews and has entered Jerusalem. This is something that will happen at the end of the world, and it is a great war that occurs when the 6th trumpet and the 2nd fire come to pass. This war occurs after the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation and the 3.5 years that follow it. So what is the cause of the war? It is a war that is waged in pursuit of the breaking of the covenant of the last 7 years of Daniel, which was a welcome event for Israel, but a loss of a good opportunity for the Arab world to attack Israel and make it disappear from the face of the earth forever. However, the Antichrist will not be welcomed by the Jews in Jerusalem for such a long period of time. This is because the Antichrist will ban sacrifices and offerings in the Jewish temple and force the Jews to worship him as a god. At this time, Jerusalem may see a revolutionary resistance like the one that the Maccabees brothers raised against Antiochus Epiphanes in the past. The Arab world, which has seized this opportunity, will attack Jerusalem, which will be an attack on the Antichrist. This war immediately provoked the king of the north, who led many soldiers from the extreme north and came like a storm and covered the land like a cloud. Ezekiel chapter 38:9 You and all your troops and the many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm you will be like a cloud covering the land. This will happen on the day, month, year, and hour that God commands the angel to release the 4 angels bound in the great river Euphrates. Revelation 9:14-15. It said to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. 15 And the 4 angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. Daniel 1:1-24-25 describes the end of the Antichrist in this way. When the richest provinces feel secure, he will invade them and will achieve what neither his fathers nor his forefathers did. He will distribute plunder, loot and wealth among his followers. He will plot the overthrow of fortresses but only for a time. With a large army he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south. The king of the south will wage war with a large and very powerful army, but he will not be able to stand because of the plots devised against him. The Antichrist will be troubled by rumors from the northeast. What are rumors from the northeast? Zechariah prophesied about the return of Jesus. Zechariah 14:4 and said, On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. This means that Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives in front of Jerusalem. Therefore, the rumor of Jesus' return will cause the Antichrist to become enraged and go mad. And he will go out and rage and kill and destroy many. At this time, Jerusalem will experience the great tribulation, the likes of which the world has never seen. The killing, destruction, and cruelty of the Jews will reach its peak. At this time, those who do not follow Jesus' words will not survive in Jerusalem. Jesus said this in Matthew 24:16-19, Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. 17 Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. 18 Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. 19 How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. This is the period that includes the judgments of the last 7 bowls. Third, the characteristics of the last days when the Antichrist appears are evil and licentious. So, when the Lord returns, it will be like the time of the Noah's flood and Sodom and Gomorrah. The church will be dominated by evil and immoral culture. That is why the era has come when homosexual pastors and homosexual church officials roam the church. In verse 9 of the text, it says, Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. Today, the whole world has become a world that is desperate to spread homosexuality and comprehensive anti-discrimination laws. The origin of this obscene culture dates back to the French Revolution of 1968. Austrian psychologist and communist Wilhelm Reich combined Marxist communism and Freudian psychology to call for a sexual politics sexual revolution. Wilhelm Reich was 8 years old when his mother had an affair with her tutor, which was discovered by his father. His mother committed suicide as a result of this incident. Today, the whole world is obsessed with spreading homosexuality and comprehensive anti-discrimination laws. The origin of this obscene culture dates back to the French Revolution of 1968. The Austrian psychologist and communist Wilhelm Reich combined Marxist communism and Freudian psychology to call for a sexual revolution. Wilhelm Reich was 8 years old when his mother had an affair with her tutor, which was discovered by his father. His mother committed suicide as a result of this incident. Reich, who lost his mother at an early age, became resentful of his father's outdated sexual morality, which he believed had taken his mother away from him. As Reich grew up and became a young man, he interviewed workers and discovered that the workers were most stressed when their sex life was not going well. He came to his own conclusion that the reason for their poor sex life was that they had small homes, babies, and were overworked at work. He then began to argue that we must have a sexual revolution for human happiness and satisfaction. He believed that the greatest happiness of humans comes through sex. And he argued that the way to achieve happiness through sex without any obstacles is to be happy as long as one's sex life is smooth, even if it is promiscuous. This is the first time he used the term orgasm. So he came to the conclusion that the sexual revolution would transform society. Communism is about creating a happy world in which there are no rich or poor. Through materialism, and Wilhelm Reich thought that transforming society by allowing people to use sex freely would do the trick. To change such a world, he advocated sexual politics, and to achieve this, he advocated moving forward to a sexual revolution and completely replacing the existing outdated ethics, religion, and moral consciousness. In other words, he claimed that the greatest happiness of humans comes when repressed sexual desires are released. It is at that moment that one becomes the happiest. This theory states that this is possible as long as one is 13 years of age or older. As a result of this influence, the leftists have now created a law in the Korean constitution that makes sexual crimes not a crime and innocent if agreed upon if one is 13 years of age or older. However, in the eyes of the left, there are forces that hinder this free sexual intercourse, and they are the family, school, and church. So, they say that they must overthrow the traditional family, school, and church ethics, morals, and values and revolutionize them. To do this, they must force them through politics and legislation. So, they are trying to legislate homosexuality and comprehensive anti-discrimination laws to politically enforce sexual politics. The French 68 Revolution began with the actions of Wilhelm Reich, who was influenced by the Chinese Cultural Revolution in 1966 and followed the ideas of sexual revolution and sexual politics. In other words, the French 68 Revolution began at the University of Paris-Nanterre, where male students were protesting against a regulation that prohibited male students from entering the female dormitory after 10 p.m. The basis for this protest was based on the ideas of Wilhelm Reich's sexual revolution and sexual politics. Why should the state restrict us from having sex to our heart's content? For this reason, they demanded that men be allowed to enter women's dormitories late at night and enjoy sexual freedom to their heart's content. At first, about 8 people started a demonstration. However, when the police used a little physical force to suppress the demonstration, it spread across the country. They demanded the impossible. They claimed sexual liberation. Then, workers joined in and a general strike broke out. Students were mainly in the vanguard during the general strike. The reason for this was that the state restricted us from having sex to our heart's content based on Wilhelm Reich's sexual revolution and the idea of sexual politics. Why should the state restrict us from having sex to our heart's content? For this reason, men were allowed to enter women's dormitories late at night and enjoy sexual freedom to their heart's content. About 8 people started a demonstration at first. But when a little physical force was used to suppress it, it spread across the country. Students aged 13 and over formed and instigated sex squads. This incident triggered the anti-war movement, such as the US's participation in the Vietnam War. And the 68 Revolution spread like wildfire around the world, calling it freedom from oppression. This is the neo-Machiavellianism ideology. This is the 68 Revolution. It was the second Sodom-Gomorrah revolution for an evil and obscene world. From this point on, the world began to take extreme measures, calling for the end of the world and the judgment of heaven. Today, as we are heading towards an evil and immoral world, the day of God's judgment is drawing closer and closer. In other words, the appearance of the Antichrist and the second coming of Jesus are imminent. The people of the Lord who have been saved must not be contaminated by the wicked and immoral culture of this world as holy people. We must escape from the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of this life. If we are stained with luxury, pleasure, and idols, we will be destroyed forever. The word is blocked because of pleasure, anxiety, and greed for wealth. We must keep our minds straight so that we do not fall into religious apostasy because of the seduction of worldly lust and pleasure. 2 Corinthians chapter 11:3 says, "But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ." Revelation chapter 17:1 One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute, who sits by many waters." The whore refers to the false church. It refers to the forces that deceive people with false truths and corrupt gospels that have entered the church. We must be on guard against those who are seduced by the world of the Antichrist, the single religion, and the ecclesiastical union. We must not fall for the World Council of Churches, which supports the integration of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. We must distance ourselves from those who support the acceptance of homosexuality and other apostasy. Our Lord God and the Lamb Jesus say this in Revelation chapter 18:4. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues." Why are they so eager to participate in something that God considers abominable when the world's fame, applause, and media attention are so great? We must discern between the famous pastors and the foolish ones who protest with the label of a large church. The word on this 2 Timothy chapter 3:4-5 says, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. 5. Having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people. The devil is desperate to make even one believer into a child of hell, and he is leading the world astray through plausible fake shepherds. May you not look at people, but look at the words of truth and keep your faith in the name of the Lord.